It's a short-term, destructive, unsustainable operation.
I was absolutely astonished that that could happen in Australia. It felt unreal to me. It felt that it was like third world decision-making.
In the safe harbour of Port Lincoln in South Australia, the second biggest fishing trawler in the world sits uselessly tethered to the wharf. It's shackled by the Australian government, willing to sink its own fisheries regulator to stop the super trawler plying our waters. No one knows when she will cast off or where she will go. Its nets are idle, its crew dispersed, and its owners bleeding money. But the most extraordinary part of this story is why on earth Australian officials gave the super trawler every encouragement to leave Holland and sail right in to a political firestorm. Four Corners was invited on board the super trawler by Gerry Geen, the aggrieved Tasmanian businessman who brought her to Australia with his New Zealand and Dutch partners.
We turned to the Dutch because they are experts in this kind of fishing, and they had a number of vessels, all of which would have been suitable for fishing in Australia.
Before she was flagged the Able Tasman, the super trawler was known by her Dutch name, the FV Margiris. At 142 metres, she runs the length of two Qantas A380 Airbuses. Her huge nets are more than twice that length. But it's the super trawler's enormous industrial-scale fish factory below deck that galvanises her critics. Here the crew can process and store 4,500 tonnes of fish, allowing the boat to stay out fishing weeks longer than any Australian trawler. Why did you want to get this boat here?
This boat would allow us to catch these fish at least cost so that we could afford to sell them into international markets. This boat allows us to catch a high-quality fish for human consumption.
Controversy follows super trawlers around the globe. But that's exactly why Gerry Geen asked his Dutch partners to come to Canberra to meet with regulators at the headquarters of AFMA, the Australian Fisheries Management Authority. The Dutch arrived in February this year, long before the Margiris.
Me, together with my colleague, we decided, well, let's hop on a flight. Let's take a flight. Let's fly to Australia and see what's there.
Dirk van der Plas is one of the owners of the Margiris.
We had a meeting with the senior management of AFMA, which was a key actually for us in this visit to Australia. We were seeking for reconfirmation from their side that there would be not any problem if we would bring a vessel all the way from Holland to Australia. And actually, that's what they confirmed. Literally what they said, we will back you up no matter what happens, if you follow the rules. And we said, well, we can accept that, of course.
How important were these assurances for your Dutch partners, and how acutely aware of the politics of this situation were they?
Absolutely pivotal. This was crucial information. If they hadn't have received that assurance, the joint venture would not have gone ahead.
The Dutch and Geen were acutely aware the super trawler would be a political target for environmentalists in Australia. because shortly after their meeting with Australian officials, the Margiris was halfway around the world in the poorly regulated fishing grounds off West Africa, under attack by Greenpeace. In a high-profile exploit, Greenpeace steered their inflatable raft up to the Margiris and painted "Plunder" on her hull.
It's trying to get across in a single word that this is the rich, developed world that is exporting its problem to the developing world. A coalition of local fishing communities and local leaders joined with Greenpeace to start documenting what was going on, and the Margiris was among the boats that was there off the west coast of Africa.
Local fishermen from Senegal to Mauritania were pressuring their governments to ban super trawlers off their coast, arguing they were having a catastrophic effect on their catches.
You have a large population of artisanal fishers who depend every day on what they can catch in very small boats, bring to shore and then sell at a local market. Super trawler can come in and catch far more, sell it far more cheaply at the local market as well. And then these artisanal fishers have got no industry, no employment, no livelihood. So there's all those social impacts that have been causing concerns too.
So, how big was the political problem for the super trawlers in West Africa?
Very big.
Bringing a super trawler to Australia would also be a big political problem, and Gerry Geen knew it. But one surprising factor driving him was climate change. As the waters warmed in his old fishing grounds off Tasmania's east coast, his catches got smaller.
The fish that we were targeting, which prefer cooler waters, were disappearing. So they were going off the edge of the continental shelf to the deeper water, where they were harder to catch.
Jack mackerel and redbait were his target species. He caught them by the ton as fish food for his company, Seafish Tasmania. Many locals argued the stocks disappeared because they'd been overfished. But evidence that warming water had at least some impact on his fishing grounds were being observed at the CSIRO in Hobart.
It's not just the pelagics that are changing.
The jack mackerel are still there, but they may be further south or in deeper water off the continental shelf. Because they're not visible at the surface, it's a lot harder for fishing vessels to find them. So the actual act of finding fish has got harder as well.
Gerry Geen's answer was a super trawler. It could roam further, fish longer, and be far more profitable. It took him 7 years lobbying to persuade Australia's fisheries regulator, AFMA, a super trawler would not be a risk to the environment or the local fishery.
We spent 7 years developing those operating rules for the fishery, and they were finally passed by Parliament in 2009.
For many Australians, a super trawler in our seas was always going to be a big risk. And from the outset, the most vocal opponents were Australia's powerful recreational fishing lobby.
There are 5 million recreational fishers in Australia, about a quarter of the population.
Graham Pike is co-founder of RecFish Australia. He's also their voice on a key AFMA committee that advises on small pelagic fish like jack mackerel and redbait.
They're small fish, and just about everything in the ocean hates them or eats them. If you wipe out the small pelagic fish, you do damage to other finfish species, threatened and endangered bird species, whales, dolphins, seals.
Pike feared the super-trawler could decimate the pelagic fishery.
I was extremely concerned with the proposal, but the proponents of the super-trawler at that stage met the CEO of AFMA, and I renewed my determination to ensure that we had the science covered.
Under AFMA's rules, the small pelagic fishery stretches from Tasmania to Western Australia and east to Queensland. This year, the total recommended sustainable catch is around 36,000 tonnes of fish. Gerry Geen's group has about half the quota, 18,000 tonnes. In February this year, AFMA headquarters in Canberra held an advisory committee meeting on the small pelagic fishery. Graham Pike was representing the recreational fishers. Gerry Geen was also present as a commercial fisher's voice. As the meeting unfolded, Pike became alarmed.
My feeling was that AFMA, the Fisheries Management Authority, was quite keen about a super-trawler. It was going to revitalise the small pelagic fishery. It was going to inject funds into research, but only after the fishing had begun, and that, in my view, was very wrong. And there was going to be economic benefit to other commercial fishermen who were going to receive payments from the super-trawler enterprise for quota.
In Eden, on the far south coast of New South Wales, news a super-trawler was coming was the talk of the town by April. Brokers had begun approaching commercial fishermen here to buy up their quotas of jack mackerel and redbait for Gerry Geen and his partners, and many fishermen were delighted to sell. Monty Thompson was one of them.
I was willing to do that, and the price was 10 cents a kilo for the lease fee for the year. So, yeah, it was worth $8,000 for the year. I know of some fishermen in Eden who, if had been able to sell their quota, would have been making upwards of over $500,000.
Gerry Geen was initially reluctant to admit the super-trawler partners had been trying to buy up more quota.
It's a commercial venture, and certainly if it was viable and economic to buy other quotas or lease them, we'd certainly look at that.
But Four Corners was told by numerous commercial fishermen around the country they'd received big offers for their quotas. The super-trawler was planning to fish in Australian waters indefinitely.
The vessel left, and we hoped it would never come back to Holland. So we all had the impression it would stay in Australia forever.
However, as late as June, the minister responsible for Australia's fisheries had little idea of the super-trawler's plans. At this point, as far as he was concerned, it was a matter for the independent fisheries regulator, AFMA.
I don't think anyone had ever raised with me that it was going to operate for an indefinite period because, of course, my response even then and now is that AFMA determines the outcome. They determine the total allowable catch. They determine what quota you can use. They determine that on an annual basis through a management plan. So the individual fisheries and how they operate is not on vessels, it's by the operator and those who own the total allowable catch.
I think there's been rightly a very strong focus within Australian fishers around the world about making sure that what you're doing now is something you can keep doing.
James Finlay, the head of AFMA, was already publicly defending the super-trawler's plans to come to Australia.
Less than 10% of the fish are going to be caught, and that's going to have very small impact, if any, on the broader ecosystem.
By June, a perfect storm was brewing over the super-trawler. That month, Environment Minister Tony Burke had announced Australia was creating the largest network of marine reserves in the world.
This is a massive step forward in ocean protection. It's a bigger step forward than the globe has ever previously seen.
4 days after the Marine Parks announcement, environmentalists around the country launched a fiery social media campaign against the super-trawler, posting an online petition on the activist website GetUp. Within weeks, the protests surged, with world champion surfer Kelly Slater and other celebrities tweeting to stop the super-trawler.
I heard, like everybody else did in the newspapers, that Guy Sebastian, a singer in Australia, and Kelly Slater, an American surfer, both of whom have got very large followings on Twitter, and I guess on Facebook, added their names to the Stop the Trawler campaign. Our reaction was, how do we deal with this?
By far the most graphic image Greenpeace would use in the campaign was this photo, taken from the deck of another Dutch super-trawler. It would brutally focus attention on the most sensitive political issue for the government, Bycatch, the marine animals and incidental fish swept up in the super-trawler's net as it pursues its target catch.
Dolphins is only 10% of the total bycatch taken by these large boats, and the other 90% are usually more important ecologically speaking. Dolphins are the cute species.
The photo and others like it were taken 10 years ago by this Dutch scientist. He was hired by his government to investigate bycatch caught by the Dutch super-trawlers, including the Margiris, operating off West Africa.
Traditionally, when the bycatch is caught in the sea, it will die. I mean, it will die because of the water pressure, or it will die from damages from being taken on board or from shock.
Because dolphins, seals and other big fin fish chase the small pelagic fish for prey, they're always at risk of being tangled in the huge nets. The aim of the Dutch scientists was to modify the net design of the super-trawlers to reduce the bycatch deaths.
But that was the whole idea of our operation, that we would develop a net that would release the animals in the water. Without net adaptations, these animals will all die, and with net adaptations, a large number, 40 to 100%, will survive.
And these floats, they're new, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a small kind of kite what we are using. We are sure that the kite is open up the panel.
Okay.
That the opening is, the excluded hole is always open.
Okay, so that means that there's a wide opening that
Correct.
the animals can get out of.
Gerry Geen knew the super-trawler would be vulnerable here to a campaign targeting bycatch, particularly dolphins and seals getting caught in its net. He spent years working with scientists and AFMA to modify the net to deflect the attacks. This escape hatch, or seal excluder device as it's called, was designed after lengthy experiments on one of his smaller vessels.
We did a year of underwater camera research with cameras actually inside the net every time it was set, so that we could actually see how the animals were actually behaving in the net. And that helped us to design a device that would guide them safely out of an escape hatch and offer a high degree of protection.
The extraordinary underwater footage taken during that experiment was suppressed by AFMA and the Department of Environment, but Four Corners has obtained part of it. Some of the footage is extremely distressing. The scientists found few seals could survive more than 9 minutes caught in the net because they couldn't surface to breathe. This seal was recorded minute by minute, becoming increasingly disoriented in its bid to escape. It most likely suffered serious injuries as it struggled to finally make it out. While many seals escaped, an estimated 55 died in the net, and another 20 probably died of their injuries.
The scientists found that a better organisation of that device would be to have it upwards sloping so that the animals could see an escape hatch on the top of the net. So being air-breathing animals, this obviously makes sense. So we've reoriented the grid so that it's now gently leading the animals upwards to the escape hatch. And that's what we were planning to use.
The lessons learned from the experiment did improve the seal escape hatch planned for the super-trawler, and AFMA was satisfied with the efforts. But no escape hatch is foolproof, and images of seals dying in the trawler net would later be a red flag for the Environment Minister.
What I've seen shows some instances of exclusion devices working well, of a seal coming in and a seal going back out. Some instances of seals getting caught, and some of the most concerning of seals struggling for very long times, eventually making it out, but you've really got to wonder about the state of health by the time they leave.
But in late June, no one in the Australian government raised a red flag. That was left to Greenpeace in Holland. The Margiris was there being refitted for its long journey to Australia when Dutch activists chained themselves to her anchor rope to prevent her leaving.
Greenpeace is blocking the Margiris, a giant super-trawler, who is heading for Australian waters.
Despite the highly publicised protest, no one in AFMA or the government tried to stop the Margiris leaving Holland as planned on July 3.
There were concerns, but we were very heartened by the fact that the regulator, the Fisheries Management Authority, and Minister Ludwig were standing firm and just saying that the rules are set, provided this vessel plays by the rules, there's no problem.
You would have been aware that the head of the independent regulator in June was out on radio saying there was not a problem with this boat.
And that's exactly the same things I was saying in terms of not the individual boat.
So can you understand why they then decided they would leave Holland on the 4th of July after they had heard you, the Prime Minister and the James Finlay, the head of AFMA, saying they didn't see a problem here?
They would have also heard from the NGOs, they would have also heard from the wreck fishers, they would have also heard...
But you're the government.
Well, let me finish. They would have also heard from the Environmental Minister that he had concerns.
No, we heard absolutely nothing to that effect. And, you know, it would have been very helpful if we had had something from either of those ministers to even suggest that there could be a problem coming politically. At that point, we could have called it off.
They didn't say anything. They just let the vessel come, they let it to appear on the horizon, and then everybody started changing their minds.
On August 30, the Margiris ploughed her way into Port Lincoln, where she was met by Greenpeace activists. Her opponents outside and inside the government were now heavily relying on Burke to stop the super-trawler. But he soon discovered there was nothing in the existing environment laws to prevent her going fishing.
I think the rules failed. I think the rules failed badly. I don't think we had the structures in place to be able to deal with a massive change such as is contemplated when you go from ordinary trawling operations to the second biggest on the planet.
With the social media campaign now in overdrive, the super trawler was suddenly becoming a threat to the government's political stability. 3 days after the Margiris arrived in Australia, Burke announced on the Q&A program he would impose tough environmental conditions on the super trawler if she was going to fish in Australian waters, but not that he was stopping her.
What I do have is the legal power to impose a number of restrictions on it based on the impact that it can have, not on the fish that it's targeting, but on the bycatch, the seals, the dolphins, the other fish that are protected and listed and I have a responsibility for.
We were very relieved when he came out with a new set of conditions, which were strict environmental conditions around bycatch, but conditions that we could live with. And in fact, many of them were things that we were implementing on a voluntary basis anyway.
Now, did you have any idea at that stage that he'd also asked his department to draw up legislation that would stop this boat?
No.
Burke had secretly asked his department to prepare a new law to stop the super trawler, at least for the short term.
I felt when I made that announcement on Q&A that my hands had been tied in a way that I wasn't happy with advice from my department saying the science on some of these issues we don't know the answer to, but you've got to put the conditions in without running the checks. And there's no doubt I felt a high degree of frustration in that. I didn't know whether Cabinet and the caucus would end up supporting me in a legislative pathway, so I wasn't able to announce it at that point, but I had the department working on it straight away.
Do you think at that point that you should have warned Gerry Geen what you were doing?
I don't believe you can ever be in a situation where you break the confidentiality of Cabinet. It's been agreed that I will introduce new legislation to the Parliament to amend national environmental law, which will give me the powers that I had hoped to have to be able to apply a much more precautionary approach to the super trawler.
Overnight, the story leaked. Cabinet had backed Burke on a new law to block the super trawler for up to 2 years, while more scientific advice could be sought on its impact. Ludwig lined up to support it.
Absolutely shocked. I was absolutely shocked to hear this message. I still remember it was, I was at home and I had a bad night because we have the time difference with Australia, and every time I woke up during the night was always checking my emails, what's going on. And then I read this statement which was made by Mr. Burke, and I was just shocked.
I was absolutely astonished that that could happen in Australia. And it felt unreal to me. It felt that it was like third world decision making.
For long-time critics of global super trawlers, the government's decision was right, even if the route was rough. It was seen as a victory for sustainable fishing, not just in Australia, but around the world.
I think its sheer size is a symbol of all that's wrong globally with our fishing. I mean, around the world now we've got to the stage of more than 3/4 of our fisheries are basically overfished or at the very limit. There's not much room left anymore. And the key issue that we have is there are so many big vessels that they just drive overfishing. They have to keep on moving around to find new fisheries to fish. They have to keep on finding new opportunities, and those new opportunities don't exist.
But the super trawler's partners, left high and dry, believe the credibility of Australia's entire fisheries management has been thrown overboard.
We've got no idea what the rules are now. We don't know where the goalposts are anymore. We need to know the rules.